I want to share a story about someone I know very well and who I love very much. She's very close to me and who was deeply sad and profoundly angry, secretly. Here's her story and how EFT changed her life. I promise a happy ending. Ready? Here we go. The dad was a U.S. Navy veteran of both World War II and the Korean War, where he was injured on board a destroyer while loading a gun mount on rough seas. He suffered a closed head injury and was unconscious for 3 weeks in a hospital in Japan. He was hospitalized for 6 months altogether and was medically discharged, leaving him deaf in one ear, missing half a mouthful of teeth on the side he was hit. The only thing my friend ever knew about her dad when she was growing up was that he was in the Navy, a little hard of hearing, and he wore a thing called a partial in his mouth. Her life in this home was mostly hell. The house was never a happy home. There was never any room for happiness because of his rage. Her and her big brother never knew when he would go off, and when he did, it was devastating. If either one of them were being punished, he might go for a full week without speaking to him, and he'd tell him he couldn't stand the sight of him. These childhoods were robbed by unbelievable verbal abuse, name-calling, and physical abuse that went just beyond a spanking with a belt. Her big brother took the brunt of her dad's rage. She was always too terrified to defend him, so she just kept quiet so he wouldn't focus on her. Holidays were never safe from his tantrums, and many were ruined. Didn't matter which one. The good news for them was, whenever company came over, he would transform into the jovial, happy father. It was a completely unpredictable and unstable environment. The mom did everything she could to keep the family together and keep the peace, but she was intimidated by him too. My friend used to beg her mom to leave him, but she never could. Her mom did, however, always encourage her to leave home and get an education. It turns out that preparing to go away to college after high school graduation, she applied for grants and loans on her own. Required to fill out financial information, the dad would tell her, "Who do you think you are? What makes you think you can go to college? I'm not sending you. You don't belong there. I'm not filling anything out. It's none of their damn business how much money I make." But that just made her more determined. When she received her college registration form in the mail, in spite of her excitement, the dad ripped it up in front of her face. She just picked up the pieces off the floor and stuffed them into a little envelope, saying a prayer that they still might accept her on the day of registration. The day she left, her father said to her, "You think you're big enough to leave home? Don't you ever ask me for a dime." As she headed toward the door to leave, he said to her, "You're not going anywhere." She spun around and looked at him straight in the eye and said to him, "Watch me." She was 17 years old. Well, she lasted there almost 2 years. She never felt like she belonged there. She felt like she wasn't good enough to be there. She wasn't good enough to pledge a sorority like all the other girls at the dorm, thinking instead, "Who do I think I am? I have no business being here." Thinking, "I'm not very bright. I'm stupid. I'm just a dumbass." You know, it wasn't a very hard decision for her to drop out of school. After that, she set a goal to be hired with the airline industry as a flight attendant. And even though it was really tough in those days to get hired on, by golly, she was hired by Continental Airlines at the age of 19. She never forgot the day she was hired. It gave her a whole new level of self-respect, and it just raised her up. She made a wonderful living being that young and flew domestic and international flights. She loved helping people, learning about different cultures, customs, languages, but her personal life was very lonely. Most of her coworkers were very beautiful women. Some were even past Miss USA contestants. She struggled with body image, comparing herself to them, and that kept her feeling like she didn't fit in. She wasn't good enough there either. And her love life was a mess. Always dating men who were distant and cold and unattainable. During that time, she avoided going home to visit her parents at all costs. During rare visits, she realized that all her rage was lost on her dad. Screaming at him just made her feel awful inside. It didn't accomplish anything or change anything. It just made her feel worse, not better. It was near the end of her flying career that her big brother, estranged from his family, died alone of a drug overdose at the age of 27. Another life experience adding on to her anger and sadness, but now the added burden of guilt. Dreadful. Now I want to share something with you personal. The story I just shared about the family tragedy and the big brother and the dad, actually, that's my story. Eventually, I returned to college, finished my degree, and applied to chiropractic college. Now, chiropractic college is very intense, and I took an accelerated curriculum. And the stress of taking so many classes at once began to trigger painful childhood memories. And it became so distracting that I decided to take that first step and seek counseling. I chose a wonderful therapist. The cognitive behavioral therapy offered an intellectual insight and validation, but also it certainly helped me to be more sensitive and entitled to my emotions. I saw her for several months until we decided the issue was resolved. I certainly felt much better. I felt calmer, better balanced. And I got through the rest of school without a hitch. Turns out, I wasn't so stupid after all. Fast forward to moving back to the Midwest, near my hometown, after almost 20 years of self-exile. Living closer to my parents, being around my dad again, sadly enough, made me realize that the anger I felt inside hadn't changed at all, even with cognitive behavioral therapy. I just live closer to it now. There's more to this story, and I want to get to the point where I learned about the extraordinary power of EFT and dedicated my life to it. My path went like this. After seeing my husband use EFT experimentally on a problem patient at our clinic and get stunning results, EFT caught my attention. So I read the manual myself. And then I read it again and again. And I started on my own personal peace procedure, but purposely omitted all the past events I already worked on with my therapist back in California. And a funny thing happened along the way. I decided to test cognitive behavioral therapy and make a list of all the things I worked on with my therapist and omitted from my earlier personal peace procedure list. When I guesstimated each intensity level, it was always very low, a 1 or a 2 at most, but for testing's sake, I did it anyway. When I actually tapped on each of these events, the tears that came so quickly, the tightening in my throat, the tightening in my chest, that residual emotional response was enough evidence for me that although it may seem so intellectually, it's not enough just to talk about your problem. The emotional component held within the meridian pathways still needs a portal of exit somewhere. And that's exactly what EFT does. After that, those old memories, the guilt, the pain, the anger, the sadness, were finally laid to rest in peace forever. And I found the closest thing to personal peace I've ever known. I forgave my dad with all my heart, and I did that on my own, using EFT. Many years later, I helped my dad write a letter to the Veterans Administration to apply for 100% disability. And that's when I learned the sad truth about Dad and all the things he went through all those years ago. Unknown to us, this is what his reality was back then. He suffered from daily migraine headaches, blurred vision, bouts of double vision. The worst in his opinion was the constant pounding pain in his ears and the shrill, gusting noise of wind that blew relentlessly inside his head 24 hours a day. It interfered with his sleep, and he could only get about 3 hours of sleep a night. A pattern of insomnia that was a constant source of agitation through the rest of his life. He struggled with daily depression, anxiety, and fought back thoughts of suicide. There wasn't a name for it back then when I was a kid. Back then I called it, Dad hates my guts. Now it's called post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'm living proof that the negative programming and negative childhood messages can spill over and affect you in later life. Because if I can get over some of the darkest times of my life, I know you can overcome anything. And that's the reason why the personal peace procedure is so valuable, especially if you can go back as far as you can remember and move forward from there. Only then will you get the full benefit, accelerating your transformation into the person you've always imagined yourself being.